Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Rogue Monkey podcast. We've had another week of really interesting feedback following last week's episode with Jake Humphrey, and there was one that really jumped out that highlights why we share these stories. This one is from Instagram and at Adam Jennings. The Jake Humphrey podcast interview was awesome. Great to hear about his journey and determination. Had no idea he's got all these other projects going on. I really like that insight because far too often we hear someone's job title or we see them on TV or elsewhere and we make assumptions. We see the polished article and we don't know about the struggles, the challenges, the hard work to get where they have. And very often they may have all these other amazing things going on that we know nothing about. That is where we get started today. We're interviewing our second pilot of the podcast, but again, all is not what it seems. Over the next 40 minutes, we are going to be exploring the journey of Kirsty Murphy, the first female Red Arrows pilot and currently flying with the Blades aerobatic team. Kirsty takes us through her story and some of the lessons learned along the way, from having a dad who became a prisoner of war to dealing with some of the mental health challenges that emerged along the way. We talk about the need for people struggling to seek support, overcoming hurdles, and how mastering your mind can equip you to do incredible things. So let's get into episode 19. Every journey has its hurdles. A conversation with former Red Arrow and display pilot from the Blades, Kirsty Murphy. Hello and welcome to the show, Kirsty. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing some time with us today. If you can give our listeners just a little bit of an overview as to who you are, what your background is and kind of your journey so far.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Kirsty Murphy. I'm basically a pilot. I started off as a youngster, had a flying scholarship, did my A-levels, went to university, did aeronautical engineering, and then joined the Air Force. I've done 17 years in the Air Force where I flew on the Hawk T1. I was an instructor. I've also flown on the Tornado GR4, which was a frontline aircraft, and did missions in Iraq, and then was also in the Red Arrows as a pilot. Left the Air Force when I started a family, and I now fly for the Blades aerobatic team, which is owned by 2XL Aviation, and we are a formation aerobatics team who fly air shows around the UK and in Europe, but we also fly private passengers or fee-paying passengers. So we are technically an airline. I'm technically an airline pilot, but slight difference to your normal one.
So where did this all start? Because flying is something that I gather is in the family. Was that kind of a thing for you that set your journey in motion, or did you kind of go your own way with it?
No, it definitely. So my dad was in the Air Force. He was a navigator on fast jets, and it's really interesting looking back now. I think it's not so much that my dad encouraged me to do it, because actually he didn't. And I do remember him at one point saying, "Kirsty, I'm sure there's something better you could do with your life than join the Air Force." But it was more really the kind of awareness of it as a job. So in the summer holidays, I used to go and hang around my dad's squadron when he went to work. My mum was a teacher, and she had different school holidays to me, so I couldn't go to work with her, so I went to work with Dad instead as the childcare, if you like. And I used to help Dad plan his missions. I used to join in what they were, when they were planning and their briefings. And then when the team went off and flew, I would go into air traffic control and watch them get airborne, wait for them to come back on the radar screen, and then see them land, and then go back and join the debrief. And being part of that, it showed me what being aircrew in the Air Force is like. And I absolutely loved the family friendships, that kind of feeling, the teamwork that was happening on the squadron. And they made me part of it. They used to sort of joke about that I was the new junior navigator and stuff. So I really felt like I belonged to that squadron, and that made me think I want to be part of that. At the time, actually, the Air Force wasn't accepting fast jet pilots, and so I thought, well, I still want to be part of the Air Force. I just don't know what I'll do yet. And then when I was about 14, I think, they started letting females be fast jet pilots. And that was the point where, in my naive 14-year-old way, I said, right, well, I'll do that then. And that was really my, really focused goal from that point onwards, was to join the Air Force.
What kind of attributes do you kind of take from your childhood? Because obviously being around so many quite influential people in various roles, you must have almost been like a sponge, pulling in all these different things and ideas and things that perhaps you didn't know you were taking on board, but have helped you further down the line. Don't know if you can pick out any of those.
It's a really interesting question. I think that the two people who have had the most influence on me in terms of how I want to be, or how I aim to project myself, whether I achieve it or not, I have no idea. Time will tell. Firstly is my dad. When I did join the Air Force, I used to people used to come up to me and say, "Oh, are you Robbie Stewart's daughter?" And I felt like my name wasn't Kirsty Stewart at all. My name was Robbie Stewart's daughter, and it frustrated me initially. And then afterwards, or after a while, I thought, well, why is Dad so well known? And I started asking, and everybody seemed to have worked with him at some point, in the flying world. This is through because he was an instructor when he was on the front line, and he had a huge amount of respect. I realised, and that wasn't something I'd probably noticed until I joined the Air Force, and I realised that the respect has come from him, how he is as a person. He's not your typical, how people probably imagine, stereotypical RAF officer. He's not loud. He's not sort of arrogant. He doesn't talk about himself all the time. He's quite a quiet man. He really cares about people. He really cares about family. And I think seeing how other people respect him so much has made me want to be like that, and made me realise you can be super successful and well respected without shouting about yourself all the time. And that's probably my main trait, if you like, that I try to recreate from my dad. And then the other person was my godmother, Auntie Sybil, and she died of cancer when I was younger. But just before she died, she said to me, and this I think was her theme in life. She was a teacher. She said, "Kirsty, there's only one person you need to be honest with, and that's yourself. And if you're honest with yourself, then everything else will sort of fall out of it. Don't lie. You can lie to as many people as you like, but unless you're being honest with yourself, it's not going to work." And I think that's also very true. And I still, even now, I know when I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing by really looking inside myself and thinking, is this how you should be behaving, or is this really what you want to do? And that's been a really good guideline, I guess, from how to live my life.
So obviously a lot of people going through the early parts of their career look up to their parents in whatever roles and walk of life they're from. But obviously some of the experiences your dad had, researching his journey, they would have had quite an unusual effect on you, because there's very few people I know or have come across in any walk of life that have got some of the experiences that maybe you went through in your earlier years. Would you be happy to share just a few of those, just to kind of give that some context?
Yeah, sure. So my dad was at one point, when I was in my third year at secondary school, my dad was flying the Tornado GR1 out of Marham, and this was 1991 or 1991 when the Gulf War happened. Gulf War One, this is. So Dad went out with his squadron to that, and a few missions in was actually shot down and became a prisoner of war in Iraq, which he was for sort of 6-7 weeks. And in that time, we didn't know he was alive at all. They'd got no evidence to prove he was. And although the Iraqis you may remember or for those of you who remember Gulf War One, you may remember that they did videos with a couple of the pilots and the aircrew, and the Iraqis put it on TV. So of course that was proof of life for those families. And it backlashed against the Iraqis quite badly because or against the regime, should I say, sorry. Because they looked quite badly beaten up and obviously looked like they'd been abused, if you like. So it backlashed. So they did actually film with the other prisoners, but they didn't ever show them on TV. So I never knew Dad was alive until literally the day they were released and handed over to the Red Cross. So that was quite a key moment. And I'd already decided I wanted to join the Air Force at this point. I remember having a period of thinking, well, I'm not so sure about this now. And then when Dad came back, he was, again, because of the symbol of the man he is, really, he was very honest. He's talked to me a lot about it. He hasn't held any grudges against anybody. He's come back. You can tell I wouldn't say proud of how he behaved when he was in prison, but he has no regrets about anything he did or said or how he was when he was in prison. He had obviously some pretty life-threatening moments. The prison was bombed when he was in it by us. He was put up against a firing squad. He thought he was going to die several times, but he's still been able to walk away from that and put it to bed in a very peaceful way. He doesn't need to shout about it or anything. And I think that's been really influential on the rest of my life.
Yeah, and that's, I think, especially given that time period, so many people between the age of certainly starting secondary school and moving into their careers or off to university or whatever they choose to do at 18, that is such an influential period. So to have such and not necessarily saying whether it's positive or negative, but actually that experience alone really shaped, I guess, your view on the world, and going in to know you eventually potentially end up in the same position, certainly, or hoping to fly on a frontline mission. That must have been, was there a point where not necessarily that you had self-doubt, but you actually looked back and went, it kind of hit home, I guess, the gravity of the situation, because obviously it's not just your dad, but then he came back and was safe. But actually, oh my God, that could be me in a few years' time.
Yeah, I think when he first came back and I sort of carried on thinking about whether I wanted to do the Air Force as a career, and I realized I really did. Like, you know, it was almost a good way to make a decision. I knew what the worst case scenario was now.
Yeah.
I knew how bad it could be. I suppose one step worse would be that he didn't come home. And then I still decided I wanted to do it. So I had to think very carefully about that. I was probably quite a serious teenager. You know, I used to go out and have fun with all my friends, and I have, you know, through my 20s, did everything that everyone else has done when they're at university. But I do have a more serious side to me, I think, which does stand out because of that experience. I think as I've got older, my friends sadly have all gone through, you know, life is not just one big high, is it? Everyone goes through ups and downs. And by the time you get to my age, all your friends have had tough times through whatever reasons with family or career or whatever. And so actually I feel like we're all about the same level now, but I was probably had that serious side to me that I didn't have, that my friends didn't have as a teenager. Yeah.
So I guess moving into your journey, certainly as a pilot, obviously you've mentioned there's challenges already. Were there specific ones that kind of stuck out for you that you can recall across your journey, but also what were some of the best bits? Because I don't want this to be all doom and gloom. There's some amazing things that I'm sure happened along the way.
Yeah, so being a bit more positive for a second, my first job in the Air Force was as an instructor on the Hawk T1. So I was based on Anglesey, and I moved out of the officers' mess. I lived in a flat which was on the beachfront in Rosniger, for those of you who know Anglesey. You know, and I lived looking out over the sea. I took up kite surfing. I was flying the Hawk T1 during the day, and and there was a lot of people my age doing that same job, and that was a really amazing experience. And that was why I wanted to join the Air Force. You know, I was part of that family, that team, and it was such a great feeling. And I realized this was the right decision to do this. And the flying was amazing. As a pretty junior pilot, by the time I left that job, you know, I was responsible for, say, a 3-ship going up to Scotland overnight, flying low level through, you know, the Scottish Highlands. It was, you know, the responsibility I had at that stage of my career was pretty high, and it was a really, really happy, good time that I remember. I moved from there onto the Tornado GL4, and again, very, very different job. So now I'm on the front line. I'm learning how, you know, that extra level of skill and knowledge, all the secret bits and pieces, so that I could now go out to a conflict if I needed to. That's probably where it became really, it hit home what Dad had done. We go and do a what they call conduct after capture course, which is essentially where it's a survival course, and you sort of run around outside. You're given various navigation tasks to do, most of which obviously you do at night because you don't want to get caught. And they sometimes have different parts of the army coming out to hunt for you, and they've got infrared goggles and everything. So it's very realistic. And then at some point they do capture you, and then they essentially interrogate you for 24 hours. And it's pretty tough. They put you in stress positions. Obviously, they don't aim to physically injure you. I did actually end up with an injury by chance, but that was everyone gets through it by going, you know, just remember, this is just an exercise. It's going to end in 24 hours. Just keep going. You know, that's everybody's mentality, because it's not a particularly pleasant experience. Whereas, of course, for me, I'm going, well, actually, okay, this example is just an exercise and it is going to end in 24 hours. But my dad was in this scenario and he never knew when it was going to end until the minute it ended. You know, so that definitely put a different spin on that course. But the Tornado, in terms of professionally, the flying I did, so we used to fly at low level down to 100 feet in certain areas of Scotland where it's very uninhabited. And the real highlight of that particular tour, I remember, was flying my Fours lead check. So it's the kind of culmination of all of your flying so far. And by the end of it, it means you can lead a 4-ship. So you've got 8 people, because we've got 2 people in each aircraft. And you plan a mission. You've got you're given your targets. You have to pick which weapons you're going to drop. It's all simulated, obviously. You then have to plan all the routes, organise the whole team. But there's also other aircraft involved, so they come along and they bounce you. It's just like watching Top Gun. You know, there's some aircraft with special radar, so they can simulate being surface-to-air missiles. You've got other aircraft out there who are literally trying to track you down and shoot you down, simulated. And you're kind of so focused. It's intense pressure, and the planning cycle starts 3 hours before you get airborne. Really focused all the way through the trip. You land, you then do the debrief. The whole thing's probably lasted 6-7 hours, and then you walk out and you told, yeah, you passed. That's your pause lead check. And my word, what an amazing feeling that was, to know that, you know, you could pull all those bits of knowledge and all the experience you've got so far into that one trip and do it well. It was a fantastic feeling.
What's the mindset like to get through that? Because I've had a few friends who've done various aptitude tests, either going into either commercial or military roles, and actually they said the intensity of it is so tough. And actually, where do you develop that kind of mindset where you actually go, doesn't matter how hard it is, I'm going to plow through this, I'm going to get this done, I'm going to do it well?
It starts right at the beginning when you first start flying training. The process of a flight in the military, and it's quite interesting because we still do this in the blades, even though we're a civilian team. The process is very similar. So I think before you go into your, we'd have like a pre-brief where you get given your targets, if you like. But even in the early days, you get given the aim of the mission of the trip, and that might just be, we're going to go and learn to stall, or we're going to go and learn how to do turns, or, you know, whatever level you're at that stage in flying training. And you have a brief, so you'll have prepped for the brief, you'll have learned everything that you possibly can, so you can answer questions in the brief. The instructor then tells you what you're going to do in that brief, and then as soon as that brief starts, you're in basically a bubble. So, you know, you're not going to be looking at your phone and texting anyone or seeing if someone's called, or check your emails before you go flying. That, as soon as that bubble started, you are in that bubble, and all you're thinking about is that trip. You do the brief, and you go from the brief straight downstairs. You'll then get all your kit on. You then do what's called an out brief, which is like a last chance check that you've got everything you need to do and everything is safe, and basically that's completed by someone outside of your formation. You then get in the aircraft, you fly your trip, you come back, and then you debrief. And, you know, having started that process way back when I did, you know, trip number 1, this is how you get into an aircraft. Actually, that process is the same. It's just that last one at the end, when I was doing my force lead check, that, you know, it's just pulling all of it together. So I think it's that building block approach with anything. You know, the pressure for trip 1 probably was as high as it was for that force lead check I did, because at that point I didn't really know much about aircraft, and it was quite scary getting into aircraft in the first place. Does that make sense? So it's kind of, you get used to that routine of how you work and how you fly.
So let's look, I guess, wider than obviously just your journey, but for people looking to get into, whether it's, again, military or commercial stuff, actually, what does the journey look like for somebody who's starting out now? Because I'm sure the world has moved on a lot, maybe over the last 15, 20 years. And actually, the way in which recruitment is done is probably more broader than it's ever been. So what does that look like? And I know you're an ambassador, I think, for one of the programs that's designed to increase like diversity in the flying system. But actually, what does that look like now?
Well, it's quite an interesting question, actually, because aviation there's so many different roles you can do in aviation. So it doesn't have to be a pilot, obviously. I mean, we look at the Blades team, we've got communications managers, we've got a PR manager, we've got an events manager, we've got a sales manager, you know, none of whom are pilots. We've then got the ground support team who refuel and re-smoke the aircraft. So, and then we've got the engineers. So a huge team is involved in any form of flying. The pilot's just this one bit of it, if you like. But even being a pilot, there are so many different ways you could be a pilot and so many different types of pilots. So I obviously chose to go the Air Force route. It worked for me because I wanted to be a pilot. I also wanted that family thing that the Air Force could give me. But obviously you can be a commercial pilot. But even within commercial pilot, you can be, I mean, I'm a commercial pilot now, but I fly an aerobatics aeroplane. You know, I could fly for one of the big airlines. I could fly for a business company, you know, just fly a business jet. I could fly for someone who owns their own business jet and wants me to, you know, the CEO of some big multinational company. So the jobs, even as a pilot, are huge. And because of that, there are loads of different ways into it. And it's almost one of the, I don't know whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage. It's very difficult, I think, for young people to understand how they could become a pilot. I think probably the easiest to discuss is joining the Air Force, because there are flying scholarships available. A lot of people join the Air Cadets. So there's sort of like a funnel-like effect, if you like. And then the recruitment process for the Air Force is very clear. I think, I can't remember the exact details anymore, and they'll have changed slightly, but I think you need 5 GCSEs. I'm not sure whether you need A-levels to join. You won't need A-levels to join some of the branches. As a pilot, I can't remember whether you need 2 A-levels or not. But you sort of go for the recruitment, and then the recruitment, the interviews, the selection tests, the aptitude tests, and the team tests that you do, you know, they are defined, and that's kind of a routine, if you like. what I'm enjoying about my aviation ambassador, so this was a role set up by Department for Transport as part of their Reach for the Skies program. They're trying to get more, they're trying to increase diversity, but not just that, increase enthusiasm within young people for the next generation of aviation professionals. So obviously at the minute, I mean, never more so than the last sort of 4 or 5 months, the news is full of all the airlines and engineering companies linked to aviation who are now really struggling. And if we don't encourage young people into aviation, then we won't have an aviation industry in the UK. Grant Shapps, who's Secretary of State for Transport, is really, really keen on this. And what I've found interesting talking to him is that actually he sees it as general aviation. So that's going to local airfields like the one I fly out of here at Sywell. And the people who fly off their private pilot's licenses or get involved in flying at that level, you've got to get that base level, to get then the higher professionals involved. So that's how other people can get involved. So gliding, for example, I never glided at all, but actually that's a really cheap way to get into flying and make those inroads. Like I say, there are various fire scholarships that are out there that you can literally Google and find them. But one of the problems being is if you Google stuff, it's very hard to know whether you've got accurate information or not. So again, that's one of the aims of the outreach program and Reach for the Skies, is to try and get clear, accurate information out there for young people to figure out how they might get involved in aviation.
That's quite exciting. Looking forward then. I'd like to, I guess, take a step on in your journey, because some of the I guess the grassroots of flying, which you've talked about there, obviously a lot more people do, but there's a lot less people further down the line that had some of the later experiences you had in your flying career. So I have to ask about the Red Arrows.
Yes.
What drove you into that, and also what was the actual experience like going through it? Because that's one of the things when you talk about capturing the imagination of the next generation.
Yeah.
Most young people, whether they've got any aspirations at all, not necessarily in flying or military, but in any form of career, will still stand on a seafront or at an air show somewhere and just be like, wow, that's amazing. And I think now obviously doing what you do, that's one step further. Actually, you can do that for much longer, because I know obviously the lifetime in terms of people staying in various display teams military wise, they tend to rotate through. So actually, do you feel like now you've got this amazing opportunity to inspire, but it's your job almost indefinitely?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there. If I go back to, so I was asking Blade One the other day, so he's older than me, he's about 50. I said, why did you join the Air Force, Andy? And he said, I saw the Red Arrows display. And he said, and I thought they were coming out of the sea because they came over the horizon. He said, I thought they were coming out of the sea. It was amazing. And I thought, I really want to be able to do that. And there's so many people out there, so many current pilots in the Air Force who have joined because they saw the Red Arrows as a kid. And to wear that red flying suit is a real honour, without doubt. And I always say this to people, it's the red flying suit that's the famous bit. As soon as you take that red flying suit off, actually, it's not about you at all as a person, it's about you as a Red Arrows pilot. So it's the suit that's the important bit, and all that heritage that kind of goes along with it, and the history. I'm a bit different. I didn't join the Air Force wanting to be a Red Arrows pilot, unlike a lot of them, and it was completely off my radar, to be honest, until I was on the Tornado GR4. I was coming to the end of my 3-year tour, and I was needing to look at where I might move next as a job. And there was I call it an advert, it's not really an advert, but basically a call for applications for the Red Arrows on the wall in the corridor. And I just went over to look at it to see what were the requirements to be able to apply to the Red Arrows, because it had never crossed my mind. And I went through the list, and I'd done my Force lead check previously, which put me as an above average pilot. And I went through the list, and I can do that, I can do that, oh, I can do that, oh. And I got to the bottom of the list and thought, my God, I've actually got everything I need to have to be a Red Arrows pilot. And so I walked away, and it was that little tiny seed that was now in my brain about the Red Arrows that I had never considered before, and it grew and grew and grew. And I thought, this just seems like an amazing opportunity to go and do something incredible and be part of that. And going back to that reason for joining the Air Force, wanting to be part of this family and a team. I mean, wow, there is no better team, is there, in the Air Force than the 9 pilots on the Red Arrows team. So I thought, this is amazing. I asked if I was aware that there hadn't been a girl previously, so I asked a few of my friends who were female fast jet pilots ahead of me, and I asked them why they hadn't applied, because I knew that they were more than capable of being selected. And they said that they just hadn't wanted to be the first girl to do it. They didn't want that additional pressure and the additional attention that would come with. And I agreed with that, but thought, I just can't allow that to be the reason I don't do something. That's just for me, that's not right. So I'll put in my application and see what happens. I genuinely had no expectation of being successful in my first application. I thought I was kind of putting a marker in the sand. Look, I'm interested. And then the following year I would have applied again and then, hopefully been successful. And one of my friends applied the same year as me, and he had a very similar strategy. He was putting a marker in the sand and hoping to get in the following year. So we got selected. So sort of about 30 people apply a year. Then they select 9 purely out of your annual reports, and those 9 are invited out to spend a week with the team, and that's your selection week. And out of those 9, they'll pick 2 or 3 depending on the year. A lot of the people who were on my selection week had already been on a selection week, so they were more experienced on it. They knew what to expect. I felt pretty unprepared in that respect. I found out as much as I could, but it was a real selection of, they do a formal interview with you, a media interview with you as well, which I'd never, had to stand particularly in front of a camera too much before. They obviously do a flying test, it goes without saying that bit. But then they also do some real subtle things, like they play a game of golf, which I'd never played golf before. And it's not really to do with the golf. It's to do with how sociable and friendly you are after 4 hours of playing, when actually you kind of run out of things to say. Can you still talk and be happy and polite to someone? Because actually being in the Red Arrows, the flying is the predominant bit, but there's a huge amount of PR to be done with it. And it doesn't matter whether you've had a really rubbish trip and you feel awful. Nobody wants to talk to a miserable fast jet Red Arrows pilot, do they? They want to see a smiley Red Arrows jet pilot. So so you have to be able to put that on all the time. So there were lots of really clever little, I wouldn't call them tricks, but ways for the team to really know what kind of person you were. And because myself and my friend didn't think we were going to get in, so we were pretty relaxed about the whole week, and we just enjoyed it. And that obviously did well for us, because I think we came across very naturally. And we both got selected, which was brilliant to be selected with my friend.
So what were kind of the memories that stood out for you? Obviously, there's extensive travel with it all, and obviously some of the things you must see while you're up there, we can only imagine when we're sitting on the ground, like what must that look like? But what were kind of the standout things for you when you look back and go, oh, that was absolutely brilliant?
Flying wise, weirdly, it's not always the location. The way the Red Arrows works is obviously, because you're in close formation, you are all staring at the leader for pretty much the whole show. So I could be sometimes a bit oblivious as to where we were actually displaying. I do remember running over Athens once, running in for the show, and as we were running in, so we were just sort of stable, we weren't about to turn or anything, and the leader just said, okay team, I'll give you literally half a second, have a quick look outside. And I sort of looked over the window of the canopy, and I was like, oh my god, there's the Acropolis, this is just insane. And then we eyes back in, and then straight into the show. So my favorite display probably of all time was in the Lake District. It wasn't one of the big international ones, and it was a beautiful summer's afternoon. The air was really still. Obviously, if you've got a really turbulent day, then your flying's a lot harder. So it was a really smooth day, and it was the day before we were going on summer leave. And when the stars aligned, and I just felt like my aircraft was flying on rails. I didn't almost feel like I was flying it. It was just flying itself, and it just knew what it needed to do, and we just had an amazing show. So I really look back on that particular show as a highlight. And then some of the experiences, I got to go to the Formula One and go into the Red Bull VIP area, and there's other VIPs around, and you think, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm in the same room as some of these people. The ones that I recognise, that is rather embarrassing. I thought the English cricket team was El Diva, the opera singing group, which was rather embarrassing. But there, so amazing times in that respect.
When you obviously you transitioned out of that and obviously into the role that you're doing now, were there aspects being in the more commercial, non-military role that you're in now that you actually look back and think, oh, some of those lessons effectively that you learned earlier on in your career have really helped you in the role you're in now?
To be honest, this team is like an extension of the Air Force and the Red Arrows. So the Blades was started off as it was started off by a guy who was an ex-Red Arrows leader and another Harrier pilot, squadron boss, and they got together because everybody wants to fly with the Red Arrows, and of course it's public money, so you can't just fly people for fun. But they thought that there was a business model in that, so they started the blades. And the idea, and it still is, it's so all the guys who I fly with in the team are all ex-Red Arrows pilots. So people can come and pay and fly with us and have close formation. We don't fly a jet, we fly a single engine propeller. But all of our procedures and the way we work, because we've all come through that same system, that's how we operate. So actually, the Blades feels like a culmination of my 17 years in the Air Force, without a doubt. You know, I talked earlier about the briefing process. You know, we still do that. Our debriefs are the same as the Red Arrows. All our shows are filmed and we watch it in depth to make sure that, you know, we're making as few errors as possible, or the errors that we're talking about are the errors that we can see as a foreship, but actually on the ground people don't necessarily notice them. And that's, you know, it's only when you have your standards that high that you can pull off a really good display that people don't notice any errors on the ground. So yeah, the whole heritage behind where the company I work for now is definitely got that ex-military feel and that family feel, which is obviously why I wanted to join it in the first place.
It sounds like it's kind of the ultimate cherry on top of the cake then, after doing all of those different things that you've got to do.
It really is, actually, because the one problem with the Red Arrows is it's so intense. You don't have a second to yourself. Every minute of every day is programmed for you, and it's not sustainable. You can do it for a couple of years, 3, 4 years, maybe 5 at a real push. But after that, you know, your family definitely comes second. You know, certainly for me, having a young child, it would never work. Whereas the Blades is designed to be sustainable. The pilots can come and join it. And Andy Evans, our leader this year, or the last couple of years, he joined the team when it started in 2006, and he's still doing it and loving it. So, you know, that's what's great about it. It's a job that you can stay in.
I think that's really curious, because we talked to quite a few people involved in sport, and we spoke to like Olympians and professional athletes, and actually it almost feels like in certain aspects of successful performance careers there's almost a shelf life, whereas actually this kind of transition out, but not out of the line of work, but actually just out of the pressures of it, but still doing the core, what you absolutely love doing. Because very often when you talk to any level of performance athlete, they'll actually turn around and say to you, well, I started it because I really enjoyed it, it was really good fun and all that sort of stuff, but they always knew there was a finite point where they would not be able to, you know, go and compete at the Olympics or go running or whatever it is to the extent that they do now. But actually you found like you've got a role there that actually allows you to have that, as well as the life balance that so many people crave. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we're very lucky. Our issue being, obviously, as a business model, is our recruitment pool is small. We rely on ex-Red Arrows pilots who want to join us. So when we get an ex-Red Arrows pilot who does want to join us, we need to keep them. So it's essentially how do we retain pilots in the team, and that's what the business model has to work around. So it has to be achievable, and people have to be able to, you know, see their families, and not, you know, air shows require you to be away at weekends in the summer, so there needs to be some give back somewhere else, so actually you do see your family and your family's not suffering.
Awesome. Okay, there's another area that I want to kind of talk about. In obviously going through your journey, you had some real challenges along the way in terms of the experiences that you went through, so I don't particularly want to delve into specific challenges, but actually more the mindset and the things that you've done that have allowed you to overcome them and actually put you in a place now where you feel like so positive about some really negative experiences, but actually in a way where you've really learned from it and developed as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm sort of, it's probably easiest to say, so when I was on the Red Arrows, there was it's difficult to describe it, an unfortunate series of events is probably the best way to put it. My marriage broke down, and there were 2 crashes, separate crashes, which resulted in 2 fatalities when I was on the team. And that was all time compressed in, I think it was 11 months period, all of that happened, and none of them were linked. Individually, I would probably have coped fine with one of them, maybe 2, but the 3 combined just became too much. And it's an interesting thing, because I think it took a long time for me to realise that it had got too much. I wasn't the same person, and looking back, I think, oh my God, you know, it was written on the wall for months before I put my hand up and went, hang on, this isn't working. But you know, that's how it is. You kind of think you're okay, and you do your best, and you know, everybody just wants to always give everything that they can to a job or something that they're passionate about. I was passionate about the Red Arrows, and there was a pressure, obviously, as the first female pilot, to not mess up. And then I kind of got to the point where I put myself under so much pressure that I was having anxiety attacks, and it did become obvious that it couldn't continue. And so I had to make that, and this is probably one of the biggest lessons in my life, is I actually had to make the decision that even as the first female pilot in the Red Arrows, I was going to have to say I need to stop flying and I need to probably leave the team, because the problem with the Red Arrows is, like I say, every minute of your life is owned, and I needed a break. But you can't have a break and then just arrive back in the team in the middle of the summer season, because the team needs to continue. So the team, I needed to stop flying, but the team couldn't stop flying. So, we were going to have to part ways. And that was a really scary decision to have to make. I was very conscious of the perception. I knew that there'd be a lot of stuff. I mean, luckily, social media was not half of what it is nowadays, because I don't know how I would have coped with that. But there was plenty written in newspapers about me, about my lack of moral fibre and things like that. But they were living in my life and my shoes, and I knew that it was the right decision. And it was interesting because subsequent to that, really, the main solution to my issues was to give me some time off work, and allow me to basically try and deal with everything that I was trying to deal with, and give me some time, which works to a degree. But I realized after probably, 6-7 months of this, when I went back to work, is it doesn't actually help you deal with anything. It's just giving you a break, and you've got your reserves back up again, and you feel stronger. But of course, as soon as then something happens again, because life is not, like I said earlier, life is not all just one big high. There are ups and downs. It's natural. One of those little lows, and it doesn't have to be a big low, it would just knock me over completely. I had nothing, no reserves, if you like, and I've got no way of dealing with anything, and I clearly hadn't dealt with anything in the past. And I was lucky because in the Air Force, I was able to access some mental health support, and I always want to say cognitive behavior therapy, which was an absolute revelation to me, and I'm still fascinated by it. And I use it every day, I would say. And my husband now laughs at me, because when little things happen in life, he just laughs and says, you are better prepared than anybody else now to deal with anything in life because of this course you went on. So it essentially is about the belief, or the idea that what you think changes how you feel, and how you feel then changes how you behave, and then it's like this big circle. And it's not about always looking on the bright side of life at all. It's about being realistic, but changing maybe your perceptions. So if you think of any event that's happened, maybe that you and a best friend, or you and your wife, or you and someone well witnessed, and then if you both described that event, you would both describe it differently, because you both perceived it subtly differently. And that's true of anything that happens in your own life. You could just perceive it slightly differently. That will change. I mean, if you think about something that you're nervous about, like an interview coming up or something, you will have a physiological, you'll be thinking about it, you'll be being a bit nervous about it. That nervousness is your feeling, and then you get the physiological effects, which make you, your heart starts pounding, or you're a bit shaky, or a bit those kind of nervous feelings start sweating, and that will then change how you behave in the interview. And you will act differently in the interview because of it. So it's that process of trying to control that. Let's not get nervous about the interview in the first place. How can we change that perception? Well, instead of you thinking of it as a grilling, think of it as an opportunity to talk about yourself in a positive way. As soon as you think that changes how you feel about it, and that's a little cycle that happens. So I'm fascinated by how your mind controls your body, but actually you can control your mind as well before that even happens. It's brilliant, fascinating.
So do you think now, like going forwards, and obviously, as you said, life is not one straight, happy, cheerful line, knowing there's going to be bumps wherever they come ahead, actually you almost feel like it's not just a case of getting your reserves back to being stable, if you like, in terms of I feel like I'm not completely exhausted and I feel like I can manage day to day, but actually you almost feel above and beyond that, like you've got a tool set that allows you to deal with these almost in a better way than most normal people do.
Yeah, that's exactly the word to describe it. It's a tool set, because there's lots of other aspects to it. I've given you a very broad brush introduction to it, but you're absolutely right. And I have to say, when you said then, you've got your reserves. I've got a young child who's 5. I've got a full-time job. I've got a husband who's away a lot. I'm pretty exhausted most of the time, I would say. Even the flying is pretty physically demanding. There are certain days when we fly 5 or 6 trips, and by the end of it, I'm shattered. So actually my energy levels are definitely down at times, but it's okay because and I can tell when I'm getting, a bit irritable. I can tell, it sends the signs of me not really kind of quite having a grip on life. And then I can pull out some of these tools, like you say, for the toolbox, and just get yourself back up to a better place so that the next day actually is fine and you can, cut through it. Yeah, so it's a fascinating way to be able to sort of control how you're reacting to things sometimes, and it's really helpful when you're. I think a key word is unhelpful thoughts. For me, that's a real indicator that things are not right within myself. If I'm having, I rant sometimes about somebody or something somebody said or something that's happened, and then you realize you're doing it and you think it's not going anywhere. The only place that is going, all that negativity, is actually downwards, and that's going to make me feel worse. I'm going to behave differently at work. That will just reiterate what I'm thinking and will be on this spiral descent. So I need to stop this, identify it for what it is. It's just my brain ranting about something. It's irrelevant. It doesn't need to happen. What am I actually bothered about today? There'll be something else is bothering me. Deal with that, and then move forwards.
So I guess kind of pulling all of that together, I'm sure it would have probably been a different piece of advice if I'd have asked you in maybe like 2009. But actually, like now looking back reflectively on that whole journey, what's kind of the thing that you stand by in terms of whether it's like a golden rule or a habit or something that you feel like really helps you keep balance and keep things as positive as possible?
Do you know what? It's actually it's a rule that I think I knew before, but I didn't properly put it in action. And it's back to what my godmother said about being honest with myself. Is, when I'm irritable, be honest with myself. Why I'm irritable at something? Why have you just snapped at that person? It's not because they didn't do something you thought they were going to do. It's nothing to do with that. What is actually the problem, Kirsty? And by doing that, it sort of helps me pick up the underlying things that are going on inside my brain, if you like, before they affect other people, and then you're not taking it out on other people. So I think, that sort of being honest, being really genuinely honest with yourself has been the key thing for me to concentrate on.
I really like that. And it's a really nice way to kind of pull it all together. I have to say thank you for your honesty, because I think obviously some of those challenges you mentioned already, most people would never be comfortable talking about. And obviously on the platform that this is going out to, it's hopefully going to reach a lot of people and hopefully allow them to feel more comfortable talking about obviously challenges and hopefully getting help if they need it. But thank you so much for your time, and it's been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Nice to speak to you, Kevin.
Thank you again there, Kirsty. What a fascinating insight that was. I think there was something for everyone in that interview, but for me there was a few things that jumped out. This separation of a person's achievements and their personal attributes. Kirsty's dad had done some incredible things and overcome some even more incredible challenges, but hearing that it was who he was as a person that inspired Kirsty, I really liked that story. One of the other big things for me was the notion of building your toolbox in terms of mental skills. Whatever your aspirations are in your careers, your mind is going to play a big part in that journey and some of the inevitable challenges along the way. Jake Humphrey last week said about expecting adversity and embracing it. Kirsty's message today that she's never felt stronger in her mind to deal with the challenges that life throws at her just brings this point home. Jobs are not easy, life's not easy, but you can prepare yourself and embrace that challenge when it arrives. I hope you enjoyed today's interview, and if you want to connect with Kirsty, she's on Twitter at Kirsty Murphy 18. Make sure you check out both the Blades and RAF Benevolent Fund websites, the link to which are in the show notes. And finally, we look ahead to episode 20. Next week, we're speaking to a very interesting individual. He was the Olympic swim team captain in 1996, famously the last Olympics before lottery support for athletes came in. He has been in a huge variety of roles across his career since, and he now supports coaches on their journeys. It's a very philosophical discussion, and again, this notion of good mental well-being emerges. Have a great week, everyone, and thanks for joining us on the Rogue Monkey podcast.